Begin by simply listening. Slow down. See just how peaceful today can be. Thanks so much for swinging by. You can call me your host, your obedient servant, Sebastian St. Smalls. You're killing me, Smalls. Vincent twice. You can always call me Bennett. The plan for this one is more Jane Eyre read by the San Diego Library lady, and more Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. Thanks so much for swinging by. Wish us luck.
It's Christina Wainwright, the manager of the PD Library and from San Diego Public, and I want to welcome you back to day 16, I think it is now. We're on chapter 19 of Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte, and today's going to be a relatively short chatter, so I'm not going to feel too guilty about talking a little bit about our tea. Today's tea is a loose leaf butterbeer tea. I have never tried it before. I'm really excited. It was a gift from a friend, and in case anyone here is not a Harry Potter reader, butterbeer is a beverage that they drink in Harry Potter. It is supposed to be delightful and magically delicious. It's like a lucky charm of beverages. Okay, maybe that's not a great description of it, but I'm excited. I've never been to the magical wizarding world of Harry Potter, so I've never had a real butterbeer. So I'm hoping that this tea will be as awesome as I could get at Hogwarts or at, oh no! Hogsmeade? I just was having like a terrible blank moment. Okay, so we're gonna go ahead and try our butterbeer tea. But it's a loose leaf tea. It's called butterbeer, and just in case you're curious as what's in it to make the magic that is butterbeer, it says it's made of rooibos, caramel, hazelnut, calendula petals, and natural flavors. Whatever those are. So let's go see it and give it a try. I've been letting it steep. It said to let it steep for 7 to 14 minutes, and I wanted to give it a good chance to get nice and strong. So this has been steeping for about 14 minutes. I'm going to go ahead. Don't have a thing there. I'm going to go ahead and press it down, and we'll go ahead and pour out our tea and see how it is. What I will say, I've been really waiting all day for this. If anyone saw, I posted earlier in the day. I've been super excited. There was not a strong aroma when I opened the bag. I was hoping it would be really just like overwhelmingly caramel or something, but it's not. It was really subtle. It's still a subtle scent. I was trying to place it when I was smelling just the dried tea, because I read you the ingredients, but I felt like there should be something that reminded me of the memory of the scents, and I wasn't sure. It's like it associated something with my head, and I couldn't quite place it, and I'm sorry I'm not a better food writer, that I should have a better vocabulary for describing the smells. It reminds me a little bit of plum. I don't know if that's a great way to describe it. The caramel flavor is subtle on there. It's not really sweet. This one might be something to try again with some sugar to see if it heightened the sweetness of it. It's good though. But I feel like I might need to take a trip to Harry Potter World when the lockdown is done. You know, for research sake, just to see how close this butterbeer tea compares to the actual butterbeer. So it's a good tea, but I can give you a better judgment after I've had butterbeer. So if anyone has had butterbeer and you've also had the tea, let me know what you think of the two, because I think it's good, but I don't know, having not actually had real butterbeer. Okay. The other thing I wanted to mention today, again, because it's a short chapter, I want to thank Judy Gibson. She's been posting some beautiful, beautiful etchings, some drawings illustrating some of the chapters from our book. It does have low network connection. I hope you guys can still see me. Her book is the edition she has some wonderful woodcut engravings, and so it's just gorgeous. And it was making me think too of the edition I grew up using or checking out from the library repeatedly. I checked it out repeatedly from my library, both Otay Mesa Library and Chula Vista Public Library. The one I read, and so the closest I could find on our shelf here at the library, we have like one of these of the Three Musketeers, but it's called the Junior Illustrated Edition, or Illustrated Junior Library, and it was that. And I remember in this one that we're going to read, there was a picture that's from this chapter, and just I would look at that picture as you would go through the book, and I would just stare at it and imagine and just see. And so I'm really glad that Judy is sharing these beautiful illustrations. If anyone has the Junior Illustrated Junior Library edition of Jane Eyre. I would love it if you'd post those photos. They're the ones that I remember, or photos of the drawings. They're the ones that I grew up with, and those are still the images I have in my head, actually, when I read this book 30-some years later. It's funny how they stick with you. All right, so before we get into chapter 19, let's go ahead and review a little bit about what happened. Last chapter was also relatively short. I see somebody asking, is there a smell of butter? No, there's not a butter smell. But it's probably a butter beer smell. And, oh my goodness. Okay. Let's see. Okay, so in chapter 18, what happened? In chapter 18, Mr. Rochester had brought a house party of guests over to Thornfield Hall. And in chapter 18, she mentioned how, they had entertainments. They did really much more elaborate games of charades than I have ever played in my life. And then what they did afterwards was they talked about how Mr. Rochester was gone for a day. And when Mr. Rochester is gone, again, he's the host, the mood sort of quiets down and people are sort of a little bit adrift. 2 mysterious visitors show up in that chapter. The first is a man named Mr. Mason, who says he's a friend of Mr. Rochester's, and he's just there, and they're talking to him, and we don't really know much about him yet, but he's arrived. Meanwhile, that evening, a gypsy appears, an old gypsy woman, and she tells the servants of the hall that she needs to tell the fortunes of the single young ladies who are present at the party. She will only speak to them. She will not speak to the men. She will not speak to the older women. She must tell the fortunes of the single young women who are there. And so the various ladies go in. Miss Blanche Ingram goes in. She comes out. She's rather somber. The 3 other young ladies, Mary Ingram and the ladies Eshton, they all go in. They're giggling. That's all fun and games. They come back. While they're still giggling about what happened, Sam, the footman, comes by and asks Jane Eyre if she would like to go in as well, because the old woman has said she knows there's one more single woman that she needs to speak to. And Jane says she's going in. So that's where we left off at that chapter. So now we'll find out what happens with the gypsy. And I do apologize now too. I'm going to try to do a little bit of a gypsy voice. I will fail, I'm sure. But as long as I can keep it up, at least it'll help you tell the difference between who's Jane and who's our gypsy. All right. Let's go in for chapter 19 of Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. Have your drinks at hand. The library looked tranquil enough as I entered it, and the Sibyl, if Sibyl she were, was seated snugly enough in an easy chair at the chimney corner. She had on a red cloak and a black bonnet, or rather, a broad-brimmed gypsy hat tied down with a striped handkerchief under her chin. An extinguished candle stood on the table. She was bending over the fire and seemed reading in a little black book, like a prayer book, by the light of the blaze. She muttered the words to herself, as most old women do, while she read. She did not desist immediately on my entrance. It appeared she wished to finish a paragraph. I stood on the rug and warmed my hands, which were rather cold with sitting at a distance from the drawing-room fire. I felt now as composed as ever I did in my life. There was nothing, indeed, in the gypsy's appearance to trouble one's calm. She shut her book and slowly looked up. Her hat brim partially shaded her face, yet I could see as she raised it that it was a strange one. It looked all brown and black. Elf locks bristled out from beneath a white band which passed under her chin and came half over her cheeks, or rather jaws. Her eye confronted me at once with a bold and direct gaze. "Well, and you want your fortune told?" she said in a voice as decided as her glance, as harsh as her features. "I don't care about it, Mother. You may please yourself, but I ought to warn you, I have no faith." "It's like your impudence to say so. I expected it of you. I heard it in your step as you crossed the threshold." "Did you? You've a quick ear." "I have. And a quick eye, and a quick brain." "You need them all in your trade." "I do, especially when I've customers like you to deal with." "Why don't you tremble?" "I'm not cold." "Why don't you turn pale?" "I am not sick." "Why don't you consult my art?" "I'm not silly." The old crone nickered a laugh under her bonnet and bandage. She then drew out a short black pipe and, lighting it, began to smoke. Having indulged a while in the sedative, she raised her bent body, took the pipe from her lips, and while gazing steadily at the fire, said very deliberately, "You are cold, you are sick, and you are silly." "Prove it," I rejoined. "I will, in few words. You are cold because you are alone. No contact strikes the fire from you that is in you. You are sick because the best of feelings, the highest and the sweetest given to man, keeps far away from you. You are silly because, suffer as you may, you will not beckon it to approach, nor will you stir one step to meet it where it awaits you." She again put her short black pipe to her lips and renewed her smoking with vigor. "You might say all that to almost anyone who you knew lived as a solitary dependent in a great house." "I might say it to almost anyone, but would it be true of almost anyone?" "In my circumstances." "Yes, just so, in your circumstances. But find me another precisely place. You could scarcely find me one. If you knew it, you are peculiarly situated. Very near happiness, yes, within reach of it. The materials are all prepared. There only wants a movement to combine them. Chance laid them somewhat apart. Let them be once approached, and bliss results." I don't understand enigmas. I never could guess a riddle in my life. "If you would show me your palm, then I must cross it with silver, I suppose?" "To be sure." I gave her a shilling. She put it into an old stocking foot which she took out of her pocket, and having tied it round and returned it, she told me to hold out my hand. I did. She approached her face to the palm and poured over it without touching it. "It is too fine," said she. "I can make nothing of such a hand as that, almost without lines. Besides, what is in a palm? Destiny is not written there." "I believe you," said I. "No," she continued. "It is in the face, on the forehead, about the eyes, in the eyes themselves, in the lines of the mouth. Kneel and lift up your head." "Ah, now you are coming to reality," I said as I obeyed her. "I shall begin to put some faith in you presently." I knelt within half a yard of her. She stirred the fire so that a ripple of light broke from the disturbed coal. The glare, however, as she sat, only threw her face in a deeper shadow. Mine it illumined. Mine it illumined. I wonder with what feelings you came to me tonight," she said, when she had examined me a while. "I wonder what thoughts are busy in your heart during all the hours you sit in yonder room, with the fine people flitting before you like shapes in a magic lantern. Just as little sympathetic communion passing between you and them as if they were really mere shadows of human forms, and not... I feel tired sometimes, or tired often, sleepy sometimes, but seldom sad." "Then you have some secret hope to buoy you up and please you with whispers of the future." "Not I. The utmost I hope is to save money enough out of my earnings to set up a school someday in a little house rented by myself." "A mean nutriment for the spirit to exist on. And sitting in that window seat, you see, I know your habits." "You have learned them from the servants." "Ah, you think yourself sharp?" "Well, perhaps I have. To speak truth, I have an acquaintance with one of them, Mrs. Poole." I started to my feet when I heard the name. "You have you?" thought I. "There is devilry, in the business after all, then." "Don't be alarmed," continued the strange being. "She's a safe hand, quiet. Anyone may repose confidence in her. But as I was saying, sitting in that window seat, do you think of nothing but your future school? Have you no present interest in any of the company who occupy the sofas and chairs before you? Is there not one face you study? One figure whose movements you follow with, at least, Curiosity? I like to observe all the faces and all the figures. But do you never single one from the rest? Or it may be two. I do frequently. When the gestures or looks of a pair seem telling a tale, it amuses me to watch them. What tale do you like best to hear? Oh, I have not much choice. They generally run on the same theme, courtship, and promise to end in the same catastrophe, marriage. And do you like that monotonous theme? Positively, I don't care about it. It is nothing to me. Nothing to you? When a lady, young and full of life and health, charming with beauty and endowed with rank and fortune, sits and smiles in the eyes of a gentleman what? You know, and perhaps think well of? I don't know the gentleman here. I have scarcely interchanged a syllable with one of them. I consider some respectable and stately, and middle-aged, and others young, dashing, handsome, and lively, but certainly they are all at liberty to be the recipients of whose smiles they please, without my feeling disposed to consider the transactions of any moment to me. You don't know the gentleman here? You have not exchanged a syllable with one of them? Will you say that of the master of the house? He is not at home. A profound remark, a most ingenious quibble, and will be back here tonight or tomorrow. Does this circumstance exclude him from the list of your acquaintance? Blot him, as it were, out of existence? No, but I can scarcely see what Mr. Rochester has to do with the theme you had introduced. I was talking of ladies, smiling in the eyes of gentlemen, and of late so many smiles have been shed into Mr. Rochester's eyes that they overflow like 2 cups filled above the brim. Have you never remarked that? Mr. Rochester has a right to enjoy the society of his guests? No question about his right. But have you never observed that, of all the tales told here about matrimony, Mr. Rochester has been favored with the most lively and the most continuous? The eagerness of a listener quickens the tongue of a narrator. I said this rather to myself than to the gypsy, whose strange talk, voice, manner had by this time wrapped me in a kind of dream. One unexpected sentence came from her lips after another, till I got involved in a web of mystification, and wondered what unseen spirit had been sitting for weeks by my heart, watching its workings and taking record of every pulse. Eagerness of a listener, repeated she. Yes, Mr. Rochester has sat by the hour, his ear inclined to the fascinating lips that took such delight in their task of communicating. And Mr. Rochester was so willing to receive, and looked so grateful for the pastime given him. You have noticed this? Gratitude in his face. Detecting! You have analyzed then. And what did you detect, if not gratitude? I said nothing. You have seen love, have you not? And looking forward, you have seen him married and beheld his bride happy? Not exactly. The witch's skill is rather at fault sometimes. What the devil have you seen, then? Never mind. I came here to inquire, not to confess. Is it known that Mr. Rochester is to be married? Yes. And to the beautiful Miss Ingram. Shortly? Appearances would warrant that conclusion, and no doubt, though with an audacity that walks chastising out of you, you seem to question it, they will be a superlatively happy pair. He must love such a handsome, noble, witty, accomplished lady, and probably she loves him, or if not his person, at least his purse. I know she considers the Rochester estate eligible to the last degree, though, God pardon me, I told her something on that point about an hour ago which made her look wondrous grave. The corners of her mouth fell half an inch. I would advise her black avist, dark skin, suitor to look out. If another comes with a longer or clearer rent roll, he's dished. But Mother, I did not come to hear Mr. Rochester's fortune. I came to hear my own, and you have told me nothing of it. Your fortune is yet doubtful. When I examined your face, one trait contradicted another. Chance has meted you a measure of happiness. That I know. I knew it before I came here this evening. She has laid it carefully on one side for you. I saw her do it. It depends on yourself to stretch out your hand and take it up. But whether you will do so is the problem I study. Kneel again on the rug. Don't keep me long. The fire scorches me. I knelt. She did not stoop toward me, but only gazed, leaning back in her chair. She began muttering. The flame flickers in the eye shines like dew. It looks soft and full of feeling. It smiles at my jargon. It is susceptible. Impression follows impression through its clear sphere. When it ceases to smile, it is sad. An unconscious lassitude weighs on the lid that signifies melancholy resulting from loneliness. It turns from me. It will not suffer further scrutiny. It seems to deny by a mocking glance the truth of the discoveries I have already made, to disown the charge both of sensibility and chagrin. Its pride and reserve only confirm me in my opinion. The eye is favorable. As to the mouth, it delights at times in laughter. It is disposed to impart all that the brain conceives, though I dare say it would be silent on much the heart experiences. Mobile and flexible, it was never intended to be compressed in the eternal silence of solitude. It is a mouth which should speak much and smile often, and have human affection for its interlocutor. That feature, too, is propitious. I see no enemy to a fortunate issue but in the brow, and that brow professes to say, I can live alone if self-respect and circumstances require me so to do. I need not sell my soul to buy bliss. I have an inward treasure born with me which can keep me alive if all extraneous delights should be withheld or offered only at a price I cannot afford to give. The forehead declares reason sits firm and holds the reins, and she will not let the feelings burst away and hurry her to wild chasms. The passions may rage furiously like true heathens as they are, and the desires may imagine all sorts of vain things, but judgment shall still have the last word in every argument, and the casting vote in every decision. Strong wind, earthquake shock, and fire may pass by, but I shall follow the guiding of that still, small voice, which interprets the dictates of conscience. Well said, forehead. Your declaration shall be respected. I have formed my plans. Right plans I deemed them, and in them I have attended to the claims of conscience, the counsels of reason. I know how soon youth would fade and bloom perish, if in the cup of bliss offered but one dreg of shame or one flavor of remorse were detected. And I do not want sacrifice, sorrow, dissolution. Such is not my taste. I wish to foster, not to blight, to earn gratitude, not to wring tears of blood, no, nor of brine. My harvest must be in smiles, in endearments, in sweet. That will do. I think I rave in a kind of exquisite delirium. I should wish now to protract this moment ad infinitum, but I dare not. So far, I have governed myself thoroughly. I have acted as I inwardly swore I would act, but further might try me beyond my strength. Rise, Miss Eyre, leave me. The play is played out. Where was I? Did I wake or sleep? Had I been dreaming? Did I dream still? The old woman's voice had changed. Her accent, her gesture, and all were familiar to me as my own face in the glass, as the speech of my own tongue. I got up, but did not go. I looked. I stirred the fire, and I looked again. But she drew her bonnet and her bandage closer about her face, and again beckoned me to depart. The flame illuminated her hands stretched out. Roused now, and on the alert for discoveries, I at once noticed that hand. It was no more the withered limb of eld than my own. It was a rounded, supple member with smooth fingers symmetrically turned. A broad ring flashed on the little finger, and stooping forward, I looked at it and saw a gem I had seen 100 times before. Again, I looked at the face, which was no longer turned from me. On the contrary, the bonnet was doffed, the bandage displaced, the head advanced. "Well, Jane, do you know me?" asked the familiar voice. "Only take off the red cloak, sir, and then—" "But the string is in a knot. Help me." "Break it off, sir." "There then, off ye lendings." And Mr. Rochester stepped out of his disguise. "Now, sir, what a strange idea." "But well carried out, eh? Don't you think so?" "With the ladies you must have managed well." "But not with you." "You did not act the character of a gypsy with me." "What character did I act? My own?" "No, some unaccountable one. In short, I believe you have been trying to draw me out, or in. You have been talking nonsense to make me talk nonsense. It is scarcely fair, sir." "Do you forgive me, Jane?" "I cannot tell till I have thought it all over. If, on reflection, I find I have fallen into no great absurdity, I shall try to forgive you, but it was not right." "Oh, you have been very correct, very careful, very sensible." I reflected and thought, on the whole, I had. It was a comfort, but indeed I had been on my guard almost from the beginning of the interview. Something of a masquerade I had suspected. I knew gypsies and fortune-tellers did not express themselves as a seeming old woman had expressed herself. Besides, I had noted her feigned voice, her anxiety to conceal her features. But my mind had been running on Grace Poole, that living enigma, that mystery of mysteries as I considered her. I had never thought of Mr. Rochester. "Well," said he, "what are you musing about? What does that grave smile signify?" "Wonder and self-congratulation, sir. I have your permission to retire now, I suppose?" "No, stay a minute, and tell me what the people in the drawing room yonder are doing." "Discussing the gypsy, I dare say." Sit down, sit down. Let me hear what they say about it." "I had better not stay long, sir. It must be near 11 o'clock. Oh, are you aware, Mr. Rochester, that a stranger has arrived here since you left this morning?" "A stranger? No, who can it be? I expected no one. Is he gone?" "No, he said he had known you long and that he could take the liberty of installing himself here till you return." "The devil he did. Did he give his name?" "His name is Mason, sir, and he comes from the West Indies, from Spanish Town in Jamaica, I think." Mr. Rochester was standing near me. He had taken my hand as if to lead me to a chair. As I spoke, he gave my wrist a convulsive grasp. The smile on his lips froze. Apparently a spasm caught his breath. "Mason, the West Indies," he said, in the tone one might fancy a speaking automaton pronouncing single words. "Mason, the West Indies," he reiterated, and he went over the syllables 3 times, growing in the intervals of speaking, whiter than ashes. He hardly seemed to know what he was doing. "Do you feel ill, sir?" I inquired. "Jane, I've got a blow. I've got a blow, Jane." And he staggered. "Oh, lean on me, sir." "Jane, you offered me your shoulder once before. Let me have it now." Yes, sir, and my arm." He sat down and made me sit beside him. Holding my hand in both his own, he chafed it, gazing on me at the same time with the most troubled and dreary look. "My little friend," said he, "I wish I were in a quiet island with only you, and trouble and danger and hideous recollections removed from me." Can I help you, sir? I'd give my life to serve you. Jane, if aid is wanted, I'll seek it at your hands. I promise you that. Thank you, sir. Tell me what to do. I'll try at least to do it. Fetch me now, Jane, a glass of wine from the dining room. It will be at supper there. Mason is with them and what he is doing. I went. I found all the party in the dining room at supper, as Mr. Rochester said. They were not seated at table. The supper was arranged on the sideboard. Each had taken what he chose, and they stood about, here and there in groups, their plates and glasses in their hands. Everyone seemed in high glee. Laughter and conversation were general and animated. Mr. Mason stood near the fire, talking to Colonel and Mrs. Dent, and appeared as merry as any of them. I filled a wine glass. I saw Miss Ingram watching me frowningly as I did so. She thought I was taking a liberty, I dare say. And I returned to the library. Mr. Rochester's extreme pallor had disappeared, and he looked once more firm and stern. He took a glass from my hand. Here is your health, Minister Spirit, he said, swallowed the contents, and returned it to me. What are they doing, Jane? Laughing and talking, sir. They don't look grave and mysterious, as if they had heard something strange. Not at all. They are full of jests and gaiety. And Mason, he was laughing too. If all these people came in a body and spit at me, what would you do, Jane? Turn them out of the room, sir, if I could. He half smiled. But if I were to go to them, and they only looked at me coldly and whispered sneeringly among each other, and then dropped off and left me, one by one, what then? Would you go with them? I rather think not, sir. I should have more pleasure in staying with you. To comfort me? Yes, sir. To comfort you, as well as I could. And if they laid you under a ban for adhering to me, I probably should know nothing about their ban, and if I did, I should care nothing about it. Then you could dare censure for my sake. I could dare it for the sake of any friend who deserved my adherence, as you, I am sure, do. Go back now into the room, step quietly up to Mason, and whisper in his ear that Mr. Rochester has come and wishes to see him. Show him in here, and then leave me. Yes, sir. I did his behest. The company all stared at me as I passed straight among them. I sought Mr. Mason, delivered the message, and preceded him from the room. I ushered him into the library, and then I went upstairs. At a late hour, after I had been in bed some time, I heard the visitors repair to their chambers. I distinguished Mr. Rochester's voice and heard him say, "This way, Mason. This is your room." He spoke cheerfully. The gay tones includes chapter 19 of Jane Eyre. I just saw a comment from Judy saying it's hard not to read ahead. I know! But I will warn you guys, I did peek ahead. The next two chapters are both really long. Be prepared. We're going to have 2 long chapters coming up in the next 2 days, but they're really good chapters. A lot of exciting stuff happens. Thank you so much for coming today. I look forward to reading more with you guys tomorrow. Take care. Have a great rest of your day. Hi, everybody. Welcome back. I'm Christina Wainwright, the branch manager at the Pacific Beach Library, welcoming you to another day of tea with Jane Eyre.
I was awash in a pool of tears.
Let's see. Today, we are going to have a very exciting chapter. I was not teasing yesterday when I said that there's a lot of good stuff coming up today and tomorrow. Let's see, but I did want to let you know, too, before we get started, I really enjoyed yesterday's literary tea when we had the butterbeer themed tea. And today, I just saw Sandra came on. She may recognize this one. Today's tea that I'm drinking is a Paddington Bear black tea. So again, we're going with that Paddington theme, sticking with the books. But this one is the Paddington Bear tea. It says it's a black tea with blood orange, hibiscus, and rose hips. I picked it up at the Shakespeare Corner Shop, an afternoon tea during a lovely tea party that they had there at Shakespeare's. And it is a lovely tea, which actually I picked up the day I went to a tea party with Sandra. So welcome to all of you guys, and isn't it fun to enjoy good teas with good friends? This one, as I mentioned, it has a really nice blood orange flavor, so it just has that little tang of orange. And after I went to that tea party and had this, I was inspired to go home and make my own orange marmalade. So of course, I brought in a little bit, so I'm having. That was a snack I was enjoying when 3 o'clock hit and I hit the live button. So yeah, a little bit of orange marmalade on toast, very Paddington Bearish. So yeah, I hope you guys are enjoying something lovely today too. A good drink, maybe a good snack. Tea time is not only about the tea, it's also about the snacks. And of course, it's about the books. So today we are at Jane Eyre chapter 20. I'm going to show that. We're at the Roman numerals. We're finally at the XXs. It's so exciting. Dos Equis of Jane Eyre. And so, what we had happen in the last chapter, in chapter 19, we talked about how Mr. Rochester was gone for the day, and while he was gone, there were 2 mysterious guests that arrived at the end of chapter 18. And one was Mr. Mason, and one was a gypsy who wanted to tell the fortunes of all the single ladies. Wrong hand, single ladies. And so, the gypsy tells Jane Eyre's fortune in chapter 19. And when she does, it's sort of an odd, probing conversation. And at the end, what we see is that this gypsy was really Mr. Rochester in disguise. That was me being very surprised, even still after all these years. I don't know why he did it. But Mr. Rochester in disguise, trying to ferret out some more information from Jane Eyre and maybe plant some ideas in her mind. And so that was... they had this talk, and at the very end, he's like, well, what are the folks out in the drawing room? What are they talking about? He's like, well, they're probably talking about you. There's a weird gypsy here. And then as she's about to go to bed, she says, oh, and by the way, I don't know if you knew, there's a guy who showed up, another guest. He says he's an old friend of yours. He's like, whatever, who would be an old friend of mine who would just show up? And he says, it's Mr. Mason. And Mr. Rochester is flabbergasted. He's very stunned by this. He says it feels like a blow has been struck him. And so he basically, he asked Jane, like, what would you do if the whole world scorned me? Would you cast me aside too? And she's like, no, I would stand beside you. I'm sure you deserve that. I'm sure that you wouldn't deserve this scorn from them. So he's very distraught by this visit from Mr. Mason. And he asked her to bring Mr. Mason in to talk to him. And where the chapter ended is she hears Mr. Rochester no longer sounding relaxed and jovial, and escorting Mr. Mason to his room. So he's going to stay as a guest in Thornfield Hall. And that's where chapter 19 ended. And by the way, we were having technical difficulties yesterday, so I apologize if some of the audio got cut off. I'm just going to read the last 2 last 2 paragraphs of chapter 19 in case you missed that, and it'll transition us to chapter 20 also. So at a late hour, after I'd been in bed some time, I forgot to pour the tea. That's terrible, because I'm thirsty, and that's why I remembered. Let's go ahead and pour that Paddington Bear tea. I cannot believe I spoke about it and forgot to drink it. That's terrible. Sorry. It's a lovely tea. It's a black tea, so it has that little bit tang of bitterness to it, but the the orange just makes it really nice, and then the hibiscus also gives it that kind of sweet flavor to it. Okay. Oh my goodness. Sorry, this is what happens when you realize you didn't drink tea. And then... oh no! I've lost my page! This is tragedy. Okay, let's find it here. Okay, here we go. Last 2 paragraphs, sorry about that, of chapter 19. I get all kerfuffled when I don't have my tea, so it's important to always have good nourishment, folks. Last 2 paragraphs of chapter 19. At a late hour, after I'd been in bed some time, I heard the visitors repair to their chambers. I distinguished Mr. Rochester's voice and heard him say, "This way, Mason. This is your room." He spoke cheerfully. The gay tones set my heart at ease. I was soon asleep. Okay, now chapter 20. I had forgotten to draw my curtain, which I usually did, and also to let down my window blind. The consequence was that when the moon, which was full and bright, for the night was fine, came in her course to that space in the sky opposite my casement and looked in at me through the unveiled panes, her glorious gaze roused me. Awaking in the dead of night, I opened my eyes on her disk, silver white and crystal clear. It was beautiful, but too solemn. I half rose and stretched my arm to draw the curtain. Good God, what a cry! The night, its silence, its rest, was rent in twain by a savage, a sharp, a shrilly sound that ran from end to end of Thornfield Hall. My pulse stopped. My heart stood still. My stretched arm was paralyzed. The cry died and was not renewed. Indeed, whatever being uttered, that fearful shriek could not soon repeat it. Not the whitest winged condor on the Andes could, twice in succession, send out such a yell from the cloud shrouding his every. The thing delivering such utterance must rest ere it could repeat the effort. It came out of the third story, for it passed overhead. And overhead, yes, in the room just above my chamber ceiling, I now heard a struggle. A deadly one it seemed from the noise, and a half-smothered voice shouted, "Help! Help! Help!" 3 times, rapidly. "Will no one come?" it cried. And then, while the staggering and stamping went on wildly, I distinguished, through plank and plaster, "Rochester! Rochester! For God's sake, come!" A chamber door opened. Someone ran or rushed along the gallery. Another step stamped on the flooring above, and something fell, and there was silence. I had put on some clothes, though horror shook all my limbs. I issued from my apartment. The sleepers were all aroused. Ejaculations, terrified murmurs sounded in every room. Door after door unclosed. One looked out, and another looked out. The gallery filled. Gentlemen and ladies alike had quitted their beds, and oh, what is it? Who is hurt? What has happened? Fetch a light! Is it fire? Are there robbers? Where shall we run? Was demanded confusedly on all hands. But for the moonlight, they would have been in complete darkness. They ran to and fro. They crowded together. Some sobbed. Some stumbled. The confusion was inextricable. "Where the devil is Rochester?" cried Colonel Dent. "I cannot find him in his bed." "Here, here," was shouted in return. "Be composed, all of you. I'm coming." And the door at the end of the gallery opened, and Mr. Rochester advanced with a candle. He had just descended from the upper story. One of the ladies ran to him directly. She seized his arm. It was Miss Ingram. "What awful event has taken place?" said she. "Speak! Let us know the worst at once." "But don't pull me down or strangle me," he replied, for the Misses Eshton were clinging about him now, and the 2 dowagers, in vast white wrappers, were bearing down on him like ships in full sail. All's right, he cried. "It's a mere rehearsal of Much Ado About Nothing. Ladies, keep off, or I shall wax dangerous." And dangerous he looked. His black eyes darted sparks. Calming himself by an effort, he added, "A servant has had a nightmare, that is all. She's an excitable, nervous person. She construed her dream into an apparition, or something of that sort, no doubt, and has taken a fit with fright. Now then, I must see you all back into your rooms, for till the house is settled, she cannot be looked after. Gentlemen, have the goodness to set the ladies the example. Miss Ingram, I am sure you will not fail in evincing superiority to idle terrors. Amy and Louisa, return to your nests like a pair of doves, as you are. Mesdames, to the dowagers, you will take cold to a dead certainty if you stay in this chill gallery any longer." And so, by dint of alternate coaxing and commanding, he contrived to get them all once more enclosed in their separate dormitories. I did not wait to be ordered back to mine, but retreated unnoticed as I had left it. Not, however, to go to bed. On the contrary, I began and dressed myself carefully. The sounds I had heard after the scream and the words that had been uttered had probably been heard only by me, for they had proceeded from the room above mine, but they assured me that it was not a servant's dream which had thus struck horror through the house, and that the explanation Mr. Rochester had given was merely an invention framed to pacify his guests.
I should have
I dressed then to be ready for emergencies.
From the princess's own
When dressed, I
appointed
sat a
night.
long time by the window,
was out on a
looking out
survey
over the
all day
silent
today.
grounds and silvered fields,
Still as
and
the
waiting for
sands,
I know not what. It seemed to
So,
me that some event
Skillet
must
boy,
follow the
have the
strange
two of you been
cry,
getting along
struggle,
all right?
and call. No,
It's okay.
stillness
I know.
returned.
Your silence
Each murmur
speaks
and
volumes.
movement ceased gradually, and in
She
about an
gets
hour,
frustrated
Thornfield
every
Hall
time
was
she looks
again
up
as
and sees
hushed
you
as a
carrying
desert.
that sword on your
It
back.
seemed that sleep and
It
night
makes
had
her
resumed
feel
their
like a
empire.
failure when it comes to her
Meanwhile,
own
the moon
destiny.
declined. She
Don't
was about to
worry,
set.
It's not like you care.
Not liking to sit in the cold and darkness, I thought I would lie down on my bed, dressed as I was.
She's put in more
I left the
than enough
window and
time.
moved with little noise
Ever
across the
since
carpet.
she was a young
As I
girl,
stooped to take off my
she's gone
shoes,
through
a
rigorous
cautious
daily
hand
routines to
tapped
show
low
her
at the
dedication.
door. Am I
She
wanted?
once
I
passed
asked.
out in the freezing waters
Are you up?
trying to access
Asked the voice
this
I expected to
scene.
hear, namely my
And
master's.
she has nothing to show for it.
Yes, sir. And dressed?
That's the
Yes.
motivation driving
Come out
things.
then, quietly.
I'd be doing
I
the
obeyed.
same thing.
Mr. Rochester stood in the gallery holding a light.
She really is.
I want you, he said.
Special.
Come this way. Take your time and make no noise. My
And be
slippers were
sure
thin. I could walk the
protect
matted
her
floor
with
as
your
softly
light.
as a cat.
It's
He glided
quite
up the
beyond.
gallery and up the stairs and stopped in the
The night
dark,
brings a
low
chill.
corridor of the fateful third
Probably
story.
time we take her in.
I had followed and stood at his side. Have you a sponge in your room? He asked in a whisper. Yes, sir. Have you any salts? Volatile salts? Yes. Go back and fetch both.
What was that?
I returned, sought the sponge on the washstand, the salts in my drawer, and once more retraced my steps.
What are you doing
He
here?
still waited. He held the key in his hand. Approaching one of the small black doors, he put it in the lock. He paused and addressed me again. You don't turn sick at the sight of blood? I think I shall not. I have never been tried yet. I felt a thrill while I answered him, but no coldness and no faintness. Just give me your hand, he said. It will not do to risk a fainting fit. I put my fingers into his. Warm and steady, was his remark. He turned the key and opened the door. I saw a room I remembered to have seen before, the day Mrs. Fairfax showed me over the house. It was hung with tapestry, but the tapestry was now looped up in one part, and there was a door apparent which had then been concealed. This door was open. A light shone out of the room within. I heard thence a snarling, snatching sound, almost like a dog quarreling. Mr. Rochester, putting down his candle, said to me, "Wait a minute," and he went forward to the inner apartment. A shout of laughter greeted his entrance, noisy at first, and terminating in Grace Poole's own goblin ha! Ha! She, then, was here. He made some sort of arrangement without speaking, though I heard a low voice address him. He came out and closed the door behind him. Here, Jane, he said, and I walked round to the other side of a large bed, which, with its drawn curtains, concealed a considerable portion of the chamber. An easy chair was near the bedhead. A man sat in it, dressed, with the exception of his coat. He was still, his head leaned back, his eyes were closed. Mr. Rochester held the candle over him. I recognized in his pale and seemingly lifeless face the stranger, Mason. I saw, too, that his linen on one side and one arm was almost soaked in blood. Hold the candle, said Mr. Rochester, and I took it. He fetched a basin of water from the washstand. Hold that, said he. I obeyed. He took the sponge, dipped it in, and moistened the corpse-like face. He asked for my smelling bottle and applied it to the nostrils. Mr. Mason shortly unclosed his eyes. He groaned. Mr. Rochester opened the shirt of the wounded man, whose arm and shoulder were bandaged. He sponged away blood, trickling fast down. Is there immediate danger? Murmured Mr. Mason. Pooh, no, a mere scratch. Don't be so overcome, man. Bear up. I'll fetch a surgeon for you now myself. You'll be able to be removed by morning, I hope. Jane, he continued. Sir? I shall have to leave you in this room with this gentleman for an hour, or perhaps 2 hours. You will sponge the blood as I do when it returns. If he feels faint, you'll put the glass of water on that stand to his lips and your salts to his nose. You will not speak to him on any pretext. And Richard, it will be at the peril of your life you speak to her. Open your lips, agitate yourself, and I'll not answer for the consequences. Again, the poor man groaned. He looked as if he dared not move. Fear, either of death or of something else, appeared almost to paralyze him. Mr. Rochester put the now bloody sponge into my hand, and I proceeded to use it as he had done. He watched me a second, then saying, "Remember, no conversation." He left the room. I experienced a strange feeling as the key grated in the lock, and the sound of his retreating steps ceased to be heard. Here then I was in the third story, fastened into one of its mystic cells, night around me, a pale and bloody spectacle under my eyes and hands, A murderess, hardly separated from me by a single door. Yes, that was appalling. The rest I could bear, but I shuddered at the thought of Grace Poole bursting out upon me. I must keep to my post, however. I must watch this ghastly countenance, these blue, still lips forbidden to unclose, these eyes now shut, now opening, now wandering through the room, now fixing on me, and ever glazed with the dullness of horror. I must dip my hand again and again in the basin of blood and water and wipe away the trickling gore. I must see the light of the unsnuffed candle wane on my employment, the shadows darken on the wrought antique tapestry round me and grow black under the hangings of the vast old bed and quiver strangely over the doors of a great cabinet opposite, whose front, divided into 12 panels, bore in grim design the heads of the 12 apostles, each enclosed in its separate panels in a frame, while above them at the top rose an ebon crucifix and a dying Christ. According as the shifting obscurity and flickering gleam hovered here or glanced there, it was now the bearded physician, Luke, that bent his brow, now St. John's long hair that waved, and anon the devilish face of Judas that grew out of the panel and seemed gathering life and threatening a revelation of the arch-traitor, of Satan himself, in his subordinate form. Amid all this I had to listen as well as watch, to listen for the movements of the wild beast or the fiend in yonder side den. But since Mr. Rochester's visit, it seemed spellbound. All the night I heard but 3 sounds at 3 long intervals. A step, creak, a momentary renewal of a snarling canine noise, and a deep human groan. Then my own thoughts worried me. What crime was this that lived incarnate in this sequestered mansion, and could neither be expelled nor subdued by the owner? What mystery that broke out, now in the fire and now in blood, at the deadest hours of night? What creature was it that, masked in an ordinary woman's face and shape, uttered the voice, now of a mocking demon, and anon of a carrion-seeking bird of prey? And this man I bent over, this commonplace, quiet stranger, how had he become involved in the web of horror, and why had the fury flown at him? What made him seek this quarter of the house at an untimely season, when he should have been asleep in bed? I had heard Mr. Rochester assign him an apartment below. What brought him here? And why now was he so tame under the violence or treachery done him? Why did he so quietly submit to the concealment Mr. Rochester enforced? Why did Mr. Rochester enforce this concealment? His guest had been outraged. His own life on a former occasion had been hideously plotted against, and both attempts he smothered in secrecy and sunk in oblivion. Lastly, I saw Mr. Mason was submissive to Mr. Rochester, that the impetuous will of the latter held complete sway over the inertness of the former. The few words that had passed between them assured me of this. It was evident that, in their former intercourse, the passive disposition of the one had been habitually influenced by the active energy of the other. Hence, then, had arisen Mr. Rochester's dismay when he heard of Mr. Mason's arrival. Why had the mere name of this unresisting individual, whom his word now sufficed to control like a child, fallen on him a few hours since, as a thunderbolt might fall on an oak? Oh, I could not forget his look and his paleness when he whispered, "Jane, I have got a blow. A blow, Jane." I could not forget how the arm had trembled which he rested on my shoulder, and it was no light matter which could thus bow the resistant spirit and thrill the vigorous frame of Fairfax Rochester. When will he come? When will he come? I cried inwardly, as the night lingered and lingered, as my bleeding patient drooped, moaned, sickened, and neither day nor aid arrived. I had again and again held the water to Mason's white lips, again and again offered him the stimulating salts. My efforts seemed ineffectual. Either bodily or mental suffering, or loss of blood, or all 3 combined, were fast prostrating his strength. He moaned so, and looked so weak, wild, and lost, I feared he was dying, and I might not even speak to him. The candle, wasted at last, went out. As it expired, I perceived streaks of gray light edging the window curtains. Dawn was then approaching. Presently, I heard Pilot bark far below, out of his distant kennel in the courtyard. hope revives.
Over
Nor
here.
was it unwarranted. In 5 minutes more, the grating key, the yielding lock, warned me my watch was relieved. It could not have lasted more than 2 hours. Many a week it seemed shorter. Mr. Rochester entered, and with him the surgeon he had been to fetch. "Now, Carter, be on the alert," he said at last. "I give you but half an hour for dressing the wound, fastening the bandages, getting the patient downstairs, and all." "But is he fit to move, sir?" "No doubt of it. It is nothing serious. He is nervous. His spirits must be kept up. Come, set to work." Mr. Rochester drew back the thick curtain, drew up the Holland blind, let in all the daylight he could, and I was surprised and cheered to see how far dawn was advanced, what rosy streaks were beginning to brighten the east. Then he approached Mason, whom the surgeon was already handling. "Now, my good fellow, how are you?" he replied.
To entrust the rest.
"She's done for me, I fear," was the faint reply. "Not a whit. Courage. This day fortnight you'll hardly be a pin the worse of it. He's lost a little blood, that's all. Carter, assure him there's no danger." "I can do that conscientiously," said Carter, who had now undone the bandages. "Only I wish I could have got here sooner. He would not have bled so much. But how is this? The flesh on the shoulder is torn as well as cut.
Don't let us down.
This wound was not done with a knife. There must have been teeth here." "She bit me," he murmured. "She worried me like a tigress when Rochester got the knife from her." "You should not have yielded. You should have grappled with her at once," said Mr. Rochester. "But under such circumstances, what could one do?" returned Mason. "Oh, it was frightful," he added, shuddering, "and I did not expect it. She looked so quiet at first." "I warned you," was his friend's answer. "I said, be on your guard when you go near her. Besides, you might have waited till tomorrow and had me with you. It was mere folly to attempt the interview tonight and
I
alone."
can't wait to see you.
"I thought I could have done some good." "You thought. Yes, it makes me
One
impatient to
thing at a
hear
time.
you. But, however,
You'll
you
need
have
a map.
suffered and are
Find
likely
your
to
way
suffer
home.
enough for not taking my advice, so I'll say no more. Carter, hurry. The sun will soon rise and I must have him off." "Directly, sir. The shoulder is just bandaged. I must look to this other wound in the arm.
Head over
She has
to
had her
that
teeth here
guidance.
too, I think."
Sounds.
"She has sucked the blood. She said she drained my heart," said Mason. I saw Mr. Rochester shudder. A singularly marked expression of disgust, horror, hatred warped his countenance almost to distortion, but he only said, "Come, be silent, Richard, and never mind her gibberish. Don't repeat it." "I wish I could forget it," was the answer. "You will when you are out of the country. When you get back to Spanish Town, you may think of her as dead and buried, or rather, you need not think of her at all." "Impossible to forget this night." "It is not impossible. Have some energy, man. You thought you were as dead as a herring 2 hours since, and you are all alive and talking now. There, Carter is done with you, or nearly so. I'll make you decent in a trice. Jane," he turned to me for the first time since his re-entrance, "take this key. Go down into my dressing room, open the top drawer of the wardrobe, and take out a clean shirt and neck handkerchief. Bring them here, and be nimble." I went, sought the repository he mentioned, found the articles named, and returned with them. "Now," said he, "go to the other side of the room while I order the toilet, but don't leave the room. You may be wanted again." I retired as directed. "Was anyone stirring below when you went down, Jane?" inquired Mr. Rochester presently. "No, sir. All was very still." "We shall get you off cannily, Dick, and it will be better both for your sake and for that of the poor creature in yonder. I have striven long to avoid exposure, and I should not like it to come at last. Here, Carter, help him on with his waistcoat. Where did you leave your furred cloak? You can't travel a mile without that, I know, in this dashed cold climate. In your room? Jane, run down to Mr. Mason's room, the one next mine, and fetch a cloak you will see there." Again I ran, and again returned, bearing an immense mantle lined and edged with fur. "Now, I have another errand for you," said my untiring master. "You must away to my room again. What a mercy you are shod with velvet, Jane. A clod-hopping messenger would never do at this juncture. You must open the middle drawer of my toilet table, and take out a little phial and a little glass you will find there. Quick!" I flew thither and back, bringing the desired vessels. That's well. Now,
Good
Doctor,
work getting the map
I
of
shall
the
take the
divine
liberty of
beast.
administering a dose myself
The
on my own
terminals that control the
responsibility.
borders are noted
I got
by
this
a
cordial
series
at
of
Rome
glowing
of an
points
Italian
on them.
charlatan, a fellow
Take
you
the
would have
borders
kicked,
back
Carter.
by activating
It is not a
all
thing to be
the
used indiscriminately, but it is
You're
good
ready
upon
for
occasion,
this.
as now, for instance. Jane, a little water. He held out the tiny glass, and I half filled it from the water basin on the washstand. That will do. Now wet the lip of the phial. I did so. He measured 12 drops of a crimson liquid and presented it to Mason. Drink, Richard. It will give you the heart you lack for an hour or so. But will it hurt me? Is it inflammatory? Drink, drink, drink. Mr. Mason obeyed, because it was evidently useless to resist. He was dressed now. He still looked pale, but he was no longer gory and sullied. Mr. Rochester let him sit 3 minutes after he had swallowed the liquid. He then took his arm. Now I am sure you can get to your feet, he said. Try. The patient rose. Carter, take him under the other shoulder. Be of good cheer, Richard. Step out. That's it. I do feel better, remarked Mr. Mason. I am sure you do. Now, Jane, trip on before us away to the back stairs. Unbolt the side passage door and tell the driver of the post-chaise you will see in the yard, or just outside, for I told him not to drive his rattling wheels over the pavement, to be ready. We are coming. And Jane, if anyone is about, come to the foot of the stairs and hem. It was by this time 5:30, and the sun was on the point of rising, but I found the kitchen still dark and silent. The side passage door was fastened. I opened it with as little noise as possible. All the yard was quiet, but the gate stood wide open, and there was a post-chaise, with horses ready harnessed and driver seated on the box stationed outside. I approached him and said the gentlemen were coming. He nodded. Then I looked carefully round and listened. The stillness of early morning slumbered everywhere. The curtains were yet drawn over the servants' chamber windows. Little birds were just twittering in the blossom-blanched orchard trees, whose boughs drooped like white garlands over the wall enclosing one side of the yard. The carriage horses stamped from time to time in their closed stables. All else was still. The gentlemen now appeared. Mason, supported by Mr. Rochester and the surgeon, appeared to walk with tolerable ease. They assisted him into the chaise. Carter followed. Take care of him, said Mr. Rochester to the latter,
I'm counting
and keep him at your house till he is quite well. I shall ride over in a day or two to see how he gets on. Richard, how is it with you? The fresh air revives me, Fairfax. Leave the window open on his side, Carter. There is no wind. Goodbye, Dick. Fairfax. Well, what is it? Let her be taken care of. Let her be treated as tenderly as may be. Let her... He stopped and burst into tears. I do my best, and have done it, and will do it, was the answer. He shut up the chaise door, and the vehicle drove away. Yet would to God there was an end to all of this, added Mr. Rochester, as he closed and barred the heavy yard gates. This done, he moved with slow step and abstracted air toward a door in the wall bordering the orchard. I, supposing he had done with me, prepared to return to the house. Again, however, I heard him call, Jane. He had opened the portal and stood at it, waiting for me. Come where there is some freshness for a few moments, he said. That house is a mere dungeon. Don't you feel it so? It seems to me a splendid mansion, sir. The glamour of inexperience is over your eyes, he answered, and you see it through a charmed medium. You cannot discern that the gilding is slime and the silk draperies cobwebs, that the marble is sordid slate, and the polished woods mirror refuse chips and scaly bark. Now here, he pointed to the leafy enclosure we had entered, all is real, sweet, and pure. He strayed down a walk edged with box, with apple trees, pear trees, and cherry trees on one side and a border on the other, full of all sorts of old-fashioned flowers, stocks, sweet williams, primroses, pansies, mingled with southern wood, sweetbriar, and various fragrant herbs. They were fresh now as a succession of April showers and gleams, followed by a lovely spring morning could make them. The sun was just entering the dappled east, and his light illuminated the wreathed and dewy orchard trees and shone down the quiet walks under them. Jane, will you have a flower? He gathered a half-blown rose, the first on the bush, and offered it to me. Thank you, sir. Do you like the sunrise, Jane? That sky with its high and light clouds, which are sure to melt away as the day waxes warm. This placid and balmy atmosphere? I do, very much. You have passed a strange night, Jane. Yes, sir. And it has made you look pale. Were you afraid when I left you alone with Mason? I was afraid of someone coming out of the inner room, but I had fastened the door. I had the key in my pocket. I should have been a careless shepherd if I had left a lamb, my pet lamb, so near a wolf's den unguarded. You were safe. Will Grace Poole live here still, sir? Oh, yes. Don't trouble your head about her. Put the thing out of your thoughts. Yet it seems to me your life is hardly secure while she stays. Never fear. I will take care of myself. Is the danger you apprehended last night gone by now, sir? I cannot vouch for that till Mason is out of England, nor even then. To live, for me, Jane, is to stand on a crater crust which may crack and spew fire any day. But Mr. Mason seems a man easily led. Your influence, sir, is evidently potent with him. He will never set you at defiance or willfully injure you. Oh, no. Mason will not defy me, nor knowing it will he hurt me. But unintentionally, he might in a moment, by one careless word, deprive me, if not of life, yet forever of happiness. Tell him to be cautious, sir. Let him know what you fear, and show him how to avert the danger. He laughed sardonically, hastily took my hand, and as hastily threw it from him. If I could do that, simpleton, where would the danger be? Annihilated in a moment. Ever since I have known Mason, I have only had to say to him, do that, and the thing has been done. But I cannot give him orders in this case. I cannot say, beware of harming me, Richard, for it is imperative that I should keep him ignorant that harm to me is possible. Now you look puzzled, and I will puzzle you further. You are my little friend, are you not? I like to serve you, sir, and to obey you in all that is right. Precisely. I see you do. I see genuine contentment in your gait and mien, your eye and face when you are helping me and pleasing me, working for me and with me, in, as you characteristically say, all that is right. For if I bid you do what you thought wrong, there would be no light-footed running, no neat-handed alacrity, no lively glance and animated complexion. My friend would then turn to me, quiet and pale, and would say, no, sir, that is impossible. I cannot do it because it is wrong. And would have become immutable as a fixed star. Well, you too have power over me and may injure me. Yet I dare not show you where I am vulnerable, lest, faithful and friendly as you are, you transfix me at once. If you have no more to fear from Mr. Mason than you have from me, sir, you are very safe. God grant it may be so. Here, Jane, is an arbor. Sit down. The arbor was an arch in the wall, lined with ivy. It contained a rustic seat. Mr. Rochester took it, leaving room, however, for me, but I stood before him. Sit, he said. The bench is long enough for two. You don't hesitate to take a place at my side, do you? Is that wrong? I answered him by assuming it. To refuse would, I felt, have been unwise. Now, my little friend, while the sun drinks the dew, while all the flowers in this old garden awake and expand, and the birds fetch their young ones' breakfast out of the thornfield, and the early bees do their first spell of work, I'll put a case to you, which you must endeavor to suppose your own. But first, look at me, and tell me you are at ease, and not fearing that I err in detaining you, or that you err in staying. No, sir, I am content. Well then, Jane, call to aid your fancy. Suppose you are no longer a girl, well-reared and disciplined, but a wild boy, indulged from childhood onward. Imagine yourself in a remote foreign land. Conceive that you there commit a capital error, no matter of what nature or from what motives, but one whose consequences must follow you through life and taint all your existence. Mind, I don't say a crime. I am not speaking of shedding of blood or any other guilty act, which might make the perpetrator amenable to the law. My word is error. The results of what you have done become in time to you utterly insupportable. You take measures to obtain relief. Unusual measures, but neither unlawful nor culpable. Still, you are miserable, for hope has quitted you on the very confines of life. Your sun at noon darkens in the eclipse, which you feel will not leave it till the time of setting. Bitter and base associations have become the sole food of your memory. You wander here and there, seeking rest and exile, happiness and pleasure. I mean in heartless, sensual pleasure, such as dulls intellect and blights feeling. Heart weary and soul withered, you come home after years of voluntary banishment. You make a new acquaintance. How or where, no matter. You find in the stranger much of the good and bright qualities which you have sought for 20 years, but never before encountered. And they are all fresh, healthy, without soil, without taint. Such society revives, regenerates. You feel better days come back, higher wishes, purer feelings. You desire to recommence your life and to spend what remains to you of days in a way more worthy of an immortal being. To attain this end, are you justified in overleaping an obstacle of custom, a mere conventional impediment which neither your conscience sanctifies nor your judgment approves? He paused for an answer, and what was I to say? Oh, for some good spirit to suggest a judicious and satisfactory response. Vain aspiration. The west wind whispered in the ivy round me, but no gentle Ariel bothered its breath or borrowed its breath as a medium of speech. The birds sang in the treetops, but their song, however sweet, was inarticulate. Again, Mr. Rochester propounded his query. Is the wandering and sinful, but now rest-seeking and repentant man justified in daring the world's opinion in order to attach to him forever this gentle, gracious, genial stranger, thereby securing his own peace of mind and regeneration of life? Sir, I answered, a wanderer's repose or a sinner's reformation should never depend on a fellow creature. Men and women die, philosophers falter in wisdom, and Christians in goodness. If anyone you know has suffered and erred, let him look higher than his equals for strength to amend and solace to heal. But the instrument, God who does his work ordains the instrument. I have myself, I tell it you without parable, been a worldly, dissipated, restless man, and I believe I have found the instrument for my cure in... And he paused. The birds went on caroling, the leaves lightly rustling. I almost wondered they did not check their songs and whisper to catch the suspended revelation. But they would have had to wait many minutes, so long was the silence protracted. At last, I looked up at the tardy speaker, who was looking eagerly at me. Little friend, said he, in quite a changed tone, while his face changed too, losing all its softness and gravity and becoming harsh and sarcastic. You have noticed my tender penchant for Miss Ingram. Don't you think if I married her, she would regenerate me with a vengeance? He got up instantly, went quite to the other end of the walk, and when he came back, he was humming a tune. Jane, Jane, said he, stopping before me. You are quite pale with your vigils. Don't you curse me for disturbing your rest? Curse you? No, sir. Shake hands in confirmation of the word. What cold fingers! They were warmer last night when I touched them at the door of the mysterious chamber. Jane, when will you watch with me again? Whenever I can be useful, sir. For instance, the night before I am married? I am sure I shall not be able to sleep. Will you promise to sit up with me to bear me company? To you, I can talk of my lovely one, for now you have seen her and know her. Yes, sir. She's a rare one, is she not, Jane? Yes, sir. A strapper. A real strapper, Jane. Big, brown, and buxom, with hair just such as the ladies of Carthage must have had. Bless me, there's Dent and Lynn in the stables, going by the shrubbery, through that wicket. As I went one way, he went another, and I heard him in the yard saying cheerily, Mason got the start of you all this morning. He was gone before sunrise. I rose at 4 to see him off. And that concludes chapter 20 of Jane Eyre. I was also going to let you guys know we are now officially past the halfway point in the number of pages of the book, so yay! Thank you everybody for coming in and reading Jane Eyre with me. It's been an utter pleasure, and I look forward to reading the second half of the book with you. Thank you. Have a great rest of your day. Bye. Hi everybody, welcome back. I'm Christina Wainwright, the branch manager here at the Pacific Beach Branch Library in San Diego, and I'm glad to welcome you back to another day of Tea with Jane Eyre. Today, because it's Mother's Day, and this is all wishful thinking. I know, she likes the dog best, but he's a cute dog. But in honor of Mother's Day, I thought I'd go with a tea that made me think of my mom. I couldn't find the green genmaicha, the brown version of green tea that we often drink at home, but I found a lovely jasmine tea here in the break room. And so today I'm having a jasmine tea because I like drinking tea with my mom. We still often have it a lot with our meals. Have a nice breakfast or lunch or dinner. Tea is always good, but especially breakfast and lunch. We'd have like a nice Japanese breakfast and just always have some green tea with it. So in honor of my mom, happy early Mother's Day, and hope you're enjoying your tea. It's a nice jasmine tea. Has a good scent to it. Okay, so let's see where we are in our book. I see Judy saying she needs to make tea. Yes, you should all have tea or something else, whatever makes you happy. Today we are on chapter 21 of Tea with Jane Eyre, or chapter 21 of the book Jane Eyre. It is just Tea with Jane Eyre. So, chapter 21, what happened in our last installment was quite exciting. Mr. Rochester had some guests at Thornfield Hall, including Mr. Mason, who we didn't really know much about, and we still don't know a ton about him. But what we do know is that in chapter 20, he was mauled and ravaged. Somebody stabbed him with a knife, bit him, tried to suck his blood. Madness and mayhem. We don't really know exactly what happened up there. Mr. Rochester sort of got Mr. Mason patched up enough that the Dr. Carter could take him away, and he told Jane that Mr. Mason somehow has the ability to injure him, to deal him a blow, and that he believes that he would like to make a better start for himself, that he would like to kind of... He tells Jane a story about how imagine yourself if you were a young man and you'd made mistakes. Could you be justified in doing things that were not perhaps conventional to kind of find your path to redemption? And Jane talks with him about her feelings on that, and they're not necessarily in agreement. So we don't really get a lot of conclusion about what is happening in chapter 21, but we know that, chapter 20, but strange things happened, and we're getting some explanation from Mr. Rochester about how he feels about what's happened and maybe what happened in his past that is influencing what's happening today. Sorry to be a little mysterious. It will all come clear next week, but just wanted to let you guys know we're sort of setting the stage for what's going on. We're finding out a little bit more about the mysteries of Thornfield Hall. Okay, so now here we are in chapter 21. Let's find out what happens. Where chapter 20 left off was Mr. Mason had left, and Rochester cheerfully tells the other house guests that Mason is on his way. So now let's continue on. Chapter 21 of Jane Eyre. Presentiments are strange things, and so are sympathies, and so are signs. And the three combined make one mystery to which humanity has not yet found the key. I never laughed at presentiments in my life, because I have had strange ones of my own. Sympathies, I believe, exist, for instance, between far distant, long absent, wholly estranged relatives, asserting, notwithstanding their alienation, the unity of the source to which each traces his origin, whose workings baffle mortal comprehension. And signs, for aught we know, may be but the sympathies of nature with man. When I was a little girl, only 6 years old, I one night heard Bessie Levin say to Martha Abbott that she had been dreaming about a little child, and that to dream of children was a sure sign of trouble, either to oneself or one's kin. The saying might have worn out of my memory had not a circumstance immediately followed which served indelibly to fix it there. The next day, Bessie was sent for home to the deathbed of her little sister. Of late, I had often recalled this saying and this incident, for during the past week, scarcely a night had gone over my couch that had not brought with it a dream of an infant, which I sometimes hushed in my arms, sometimes dandled on my knee, sometimes watched playing with daisies on a lawn, or again, dabbling its hands in running water. It was a wailing child this night and a laughing one the next. Now it nestled close to me, and now it ran from me. But whatever mood the apparition evinced, whatever aspect it wore, it failed not for 7 successive nights to meet me the moment I entered the land of slumber. I did not like this iteration of one idea, this strange recurrence of one image, and I grew nervous as bedtime approached and the hour of the vision drew nearer. It was from companionship with this baby phantom I had been roused on that moonlight night when I heard the cry, and it was on the afternoon of the day following I was summoned downstairs by a message that someone wanted me in Mrs. Fairfax's room. On repairing thither, I found a man waiting for me, having the appearance of a gentleman's servant. He was dressed in deep mourning, and the hat he held in his hand was surrounded with a crape band. "I dare say you hardly remember me, miss," he said, rising as I entered, "but my name is Levin. I lived coachman with Mrs. Reed when you were at Gateshead, 8 or 9 years since, and I live there still." "Oh, Robert, how do you do? I remember you very well. You used to give me a ride sometimes on Miss Georgiana's bay pony. And how is Bessie? You are married to Bessie?" "Yes, miss. My wife is very hearty, thank you. She brought me another little one about 2 months since. We have 3 now, and both mother and child are thriving." "And are the family well at the house, Robert?" "I am sorry I can't give you better news of them, miss. They are very badly at present, in great trouble." "I hope no one is dead," I said, glancing at his black dress. He, too, looked down at the crape round his hat and replied, "Mr. John died yesterday was a week, at his chambers in London." "Mr. John?" "Yes." "And how does your mother bear it, or his mother bear it?" "Why, you see, Miss Eyre, it is not a common mishap. His life has been very wild. These last 3 years he gave himself up to strange ways, and his death was shocking." "I heard from Bessie he was not doing well." "Doing well? He could not do worse. He ruined his health and his estate among the worst men and the worst women. He got into debt and into jail. His mother helped him out twice, but as soon as he was free, he returned to his old companions and habits. His head was not strong. The knaves he lived among fooled him beyond anything I ever heard. He came down to Gateshead about 3 weeks ago and wanted Mrs. to give up all to him. Mrs. refused. Her means have long been much reduced by his extravagance. So he went back again, and the next news was that he was dead. How he died, God knows. They say he killed himself." I was silent. The tidings were frightful. Robert Levin resumed. "Mrs. has been out of health herself for some time. She got very stout, but was not strong with it, and the loss of money and fear of poverty were quite breaking her down. The information about Mr. John's death and the matter of it came too suddenly. It brought on a stroke. She was 3 days without speaking, but last Tuesday she seemed rather better. She appeared as if she wanted to say something, and kept making signs to my wife and mumbling. It was only yesterday morning, however, that Bessie understood she was pronouncing your name, and at last she made out the words, 'Bring Jane, fetch Jane Eyre. I want to speak to her.' Bessie is not sure whether she is in her right mind or means anything by the words, but she told Miss Reed and Miss Georgiana and advised them to send for you. The young ladies put it off at first, but their mother grew so restless and said 'Jane, Jane' so many times that at last they consented. I left Gateshead yesterday, and if you can get ready, miss, I should like to take you back with me early tomorrow morning." "Yes, Robert, I shall be ready. It seems to me that I ought to go." "I think so too, miss. Bessie said she was sure you would not refuse, but I suppose you will have to ask leave before you can get off?" "Yes, and I will do it now." And having directed him to the servants' hall and recommended him to the care of John's wife and the attentions of John himself, I went in search of Mr. Rochester. He was not in any of the lower rooms. He was not in the yard, the stables, or the grounds. I asked Mrs. Fairfax if she had seen him. Yes, She believed he was playing billiards with Miss Ingram. To the billiard room I hastened. The click of balls and the hum of voices resounded thence. Mr. Rochester, Miss Ingram, the two Mrs. Eshton and their admirers were all busied in the game. It required some courage to disturb so interesting a party. My errand, however, was one I could not defer, so I approached the master where he stood at Miss Ingram's side. She turned as I drew near and looked at me haughtily. Her eyes seemed to demand, "What can the creeping creature want now?" And when I said in a low voice, "Mr. Rochester," she made a movement as if tempted to order me away. I remember her appearance at the moment. It was very graceful and very striking. She wore a morning robe of sky blue crepe. A gauzy azure scarf was twisted in her hair. She had been all animation with the game, and irritated pride did not lower the expression of her haughty lineaments. "Does that person want you?" she inquired of Mr. Rochester, and Mr. Rochester turned to see who the person was. He made a curious grimace, one of his strange and equivocal demonstrations, threw down his cue, and followed me from the room. "Well, Jane," he said, as he rested his back against the schoolroom door, which he had shut. "If you please, sir, I want leave of absence for a week or two." "What to do? Where to go?" "To see a sick lady who has sent for me." "What sick lady? Where does she live?" "At Gateshead in, sure." Sure? That is 100 miles off. Who may she be that sends for people to see her at that distance?" "Her name is Reed, sir. Mrs. Reed." "Reed of Gateshead? There was a Reed of Gateshead, a magistrate." "It is his widow, sir." "And what have you to do with her? How do you know her?" "Mr. Reed was my uncle, my mother's brother." "The deuce he was! You never told me that before. You always said that you had no relations." "None that would own me, sir. Mr. Reed is dead, and his wife cast me off." "Why?" "Because I was poor and burdensome, and she disliked me." "But Reed left children. You must have cousins. Sir George Lynn was talking of a Reed of Gateshead yesterday, who, he said, was one of the veriest rascals on town. And Ingram was mentioning a Georgiana Reed at the same place, who was much admired for her beauty, a sees her to a go in London." "John Reed is dead too, sir. He ruined himself and half ruined his family, and is supposed to have committed suicide. The news so shocked his mother that it brought on an apoplectic attack." "And what good can you do to her?" "Nonsense, Jane. I would never think of running 100 miles to see an old lady who will perhaps be dead before you reach her. Besides, you say she cast you off." "Yes, sir, but that is long ago, and when her circumstances were very different. I could not be easy to neglect her wishes now." "How long will you stay?" "As short as possible, sir." "Promise me only to stay a week." "I had better not pass my word. I might be obliged to break it." "At all events, you will come back. You will not be induced under any pretext to take up a permanent residence with her?" "Oh, no. I shall certainly return if all be well." "And who goes with you? You don't travel 100 miles alone." "No, sir. She has sent her coachman." "A person to be trusted?" "Yes, sir. He has lived 10 years in the family." Mr. Rochester meditated. "When do you wish to go?" "Early tomorrow morning, sir." "Well, you must have money. You can't travel without money, and I dare say you have not much. I have given you no salary yet." "How much have you in the world, Jane?" he asked, smiling. I drew out my purse, a meager thing it was. 5 shillings, sir. He took the purse, poured the hoard into his palm, and chuckled over it as if its scantiness pleased him. Soon he produced his pocketbook. "Here," said he, offering me a note. It was £50, and he owed me but 15. I told him I had no change. "I don't want change, you know that. Take your wages." I declined, accepting more than was my due. He scowled at first, then as if recollecting something he said, Right. Better not give you all now. You would perhaps stay away 3 months if you had £50. There are 10. Is it not plenty?" "Yes, sir. But now you owe me 5. "Come back for it then. I am your banker for £40. "Mr. Rochester, I may as well mention another matter of business to you while I have the opportunity." "Matter of business? I'm curious to hear it." You have as good as informed me, sir, that you are going shortly to be married? Yes. What then? In that case, sir, Adele ought to go to school. I am sure you will perceive the necessity of it. To get her out of my bride's way, who might otherwise walk over her rather too emphatically. There's sense in the suggestion, not a doubt of it. Adele, as you say, must go to school, and you, of course, must march straight to the devil. I hope not, sir, but I must seek another situation somewhere. In course, he exclaimed, with a twang of voice and a distortion of features equally fantastic and ludicrous. He looked at me some minutes. And old Madam Reed, or the misses, her daughters, will be solicited by you to seek a place, I suppose? No, sir. I am not on such terms with my relatives as would justify me in asking favors of them. But I shall advertise. You shall walk up the pyramids of Egypt, he growled. At your peril you advertise. I wish I had only offered you a sovereign instead of 10 pounds. Give me back 9 pounds, Jane. I've a use for it. And so have I, sir, I returned, putting my hands in my purse behind me. I could not spare the money on any account. Little niggard, he said, refusing me a pecuniary request. Give me 5 pounds, Jane. Not 5 shillings, sir, nor 5 pence. Just let me look at the cash. No, sir, you are not to be trusted. Jane! Sir, promise me one thing. I'll promise you anything, sir, that I think I am likely to perform. Not to advertise, and to trust this quest of a situation to me. I'll find you one in time. I shall be glad to do so, sir, if you, in your turn, will promise that I and Adele shall be both safe out of the house before your bride enters it. Very well, very well. I'll pledge my word on it. You go tomorrow, then? Yes, sir. Early. Shall you come down to the drawing room after dinner? No, sir. I must prepare for the journey. Then you and I must bid goodbye for a little while? I suppose so, sir. And how do people perform that ceremony of parting, Jane? Teach me. I'm not quite up to it. They say farewell, or any other form they prefer. Then say it. Farewell, Mr. Rochester, for the present. What must I say? The same, if you like, sir. Farewell, Miss Eyre, for the present. Is that all? Yes. It seems stingy to my notions, and dry and unfriendly. I should like something else, a little addition to the rite. If one shook hands, for instance, but no, that would not content me either. So you'll do no more than say farewell, Jane? It is enough, sir. As much goodwill may be conveyed in one hearty word as in many. Very likely, but it is blank and cool, farewell. How long is he going to stand with his back against that door, I asked myself. I want to commence my packing. The dinner bell rung, and suddenly away he bolted without another syllable. I saw him no more during the day, and was off before he had risen in the morning. I reached the lodge at Gateshead about 5 o'clock in the afternoon of the 1st of May. I stepped in there before going up to the hall. It was very clean and neat. The ornamental windows were hung with little white curtains, the floor was spotless, the grate and fire irons were burnished bright, and the fire burned clear. Bessie sat on the hearth nursing her last born, and Robert and his sister played quietly in a corner. "Bless you! I knew you would come!" exclaimed Mrs. Levin as I entered. "Yes, Bessie," said I, after I had kissed her, "and I trust I am not too late. How is Mrs. Reed? Alive still, I hope?" "Yes, she is alive, and more sensible and collected than she was. The doctor says she may linger a week or 2 yet, but he hardly thinks she will finally recover." "Has she mentioned me lately?" "She was talking of you only this morning, and wishing you would come. But she is sleeping now, or was 10 minutes ago when I was up at the house. She generally lies in a kind of lethargy all the afternoon, and wakes up about 6 or 7. Will you rest yourself here an hour, miss, and then I will go up with you?" Robert here entered, and Bessie laid her sleeping child in the cradle and went to welcome him. Afterward, she insisted on my taking off my bonnet and having some tea, for she said I looked pale and tired. I was glad to accept her hospitality, and I submitted to be relieved of my traveling garb just as passively as I used to let her undress me when a child. Old times crowded fast back on me as I watched her bustling about, setting out the tea tray with her best china, cutting bread and butter, toasting a tea cake, and between whiles giving little Robert or Jane an occasional tap or push, just as she used to give me in former days. Bessie had retained her quick temper as well as her light foot and good looks. Tea ready? I was going to approach the table, but she desired me to sit still, quite in her old peremptory tones. I must be served at the fireside, she said, and she placed before me a little round stand with my cup and a plate of toast, absolutely as she used to accommodate me with some privately purloined dainty on a nursery chair, and I smiled and obeyed her, as in bygone days. She wanted to know if I was happy at Thornfield Hall, and what sort of a person the mistress was, and when I told her there was only a master, whether he was a nice gentleman, and if I liked him. I told her he was rather an ugly man, but quite a gentleman, and that he treated me kindly, and I was content. Then I went on to describe to her the gay company that had lately been staying at the house, and to those details Bessie listened with interest. They were precisely of the kind she relished. In such conversation an hour was soon gone. Bessie restored to me my bonnet, etc., and accompanied by her I quitted the lodge for the hall. It was also accompanied by her that I had, nearly 9 years ago, walked down the path I was now ascending. On a dark, misty, raw morning in January, I had left a hostel roof with a desperate and embittered heart, a sense of outlawry and almost of reprobation, to seek the chilly harborage of Lowood, that bourne so far away and unexplored. The same hostel roof now rose again before me. My prospects were doubtful yet, and I had yet an aching heart. I still felt as a wanderer on the face of the earth, but I experienced firmer trust in myself and in my own powers, and less withering dread of oppression. The gaping wound of my wrongs, too, was now quite healed, and the flame of resentment extinguished. You shall go first into the breakfast room first, said Bessie, as she preceded me through the hall. The young ladies will be there. In another moment, I was within that apartment. There was every article of furniture looking just as it did on the morning I was first introduced to Mr. Brocklehurst. The very rug he had stood upon still covered the hearth. Glancing at the bookcases, I thought I could distinguish the 2 volumes of Bewick's British Birds occupying their old place on the 3rd shelf, and Gulliver's Travels and the Arabian Nights ranged just above. The inanimate objects were not changed, but the living things had altered past recognition. 2 young ladies appeared before me, one very tall, almost as tall as Miss Ingram, very thin too, with a sallow face and severe mien. There was something ascetic in her look, which was augmented by the extreme plainness of a straight-skirted black stuff dress, a starched linen collar, hair combed away from the temples, and the nun-like ornament of a string of ebony beads and a crucifix. This, I felt sure, was Eliza, though I could trace little resemblance to her former self in that elongated and colorless visage. The other was as certainly Georgiana, but not the Georgiana I remembered, the slim and fairy-like girl of 11. This was a full-blown, very plump damsel, fair as waxwork, with handsome and regular features, languishing blue eyes, and ringleted yellow hair. The hue of her dress was black too, but its fashion was so different from her sister's, so much more flowing and becoming, it looked as stylish as the other's most puritanical. In each of the sisters there was one trait of the mother, and only one. The thin, pallid elder daughter had her parents' cairngorm eye. Cairngorm is a smoky brown or topaz yellow rock crystal.
This formidable adversary.
The blooming and luxuriant younger girl had her contour of jaw and chin, perhaps a little softened, but still imparting an indescribable hardness to her countenance, otherwise so voluptuous and buxom. Both ladies, as I advanced, rose to welcome me, and both addressed me by the name of Miss Eyre. Eliza's greeting was delivered in a short, abrupt voice without a smile, and then she sat down again, fixed her eyes on the fire, and seemed to forget me. Georgina added to her, "How do you do?" several commonplaces about my journey, the weather, and so on, uttered in rather a drawling tone, and accompanied by sundry side glances that measured me from head to foot, now traversing the folds of my brown merino pelisse, and now lingering on the plain trimming of my cottage bonnet. Young ladies have a remarkable way of letting you know that they think you a quiz, without actually saying the words. a certain superciliousness of look, coolness of manner, nonchalance of tone, expressed fully their sentiments on point, without committing them by any positive rudeness in word or deed. A sneer, however, whether covert or open, had now no longer that power over me it once possessed. As I sat between my cousins, I was surprised to find how easy I felt under the total neglect of the one and the semi-sarcastic attentions of the other. Eliza did not mortify, nor Georgiana ruffle me. The fact was, I had other things to think about. Within the last few months, feelings had been stirred in me so much more potent than any they could raise. Pains and pleasures so much more acute and exquisite had been excited than any it was in their power to inflict or bestow, that their errors gave me no concern, either for good or bad. "How is Mrs. Reed?" I asked soon, looking calmly at Georgiana, who thought fit to bridle at the direct address, as if it were an unexpected liberty. "Mrs. Reed? Ah, Mamma, you mean. She is extremely poorly. I doubt if you can see her tonight." "If," said I, "you would just step upstairs and tell her I am come, I should be much obliged to you." Georgiana almost started, and she opened her blue eyes wild and wide. "I know she had a particular wish to see me," I added, "and I would not defer attending to her desire longer than is absolutely necessary." "Mamma dislikes being disrupted in an evening," remarked Eliza. I soon rose, quietly took off my bonnet and gloves, uninvited, and said I would just step out to Bessie, who was, I dared say, in the kitchen, and ask her to ascertain whether Mrs. Reed was disposed to receive me or not tonight. I went, and having found Bessie and dispatched her on my errand, I proceeded to take further measures. It has heretofore been my habit always to shrink from arrogance. Received as I had been today, I should, a year ago, have resolved to quit Gateshead the very next morning. Now it was disclosed to me all at once that that would be a foolish plan. I had taken a journey of 100 miles to see my aunt, and I must stay with her till she was better or dead. As to her daughter's pride and folly, I must put it to one side, make myself independent of it. So I addressed the housekeeper, asked her to show me a room, told her I should probably be a visitor here for a week or two, had my trunk conveyed to my chamber, and followed it thither myself. I met Bessie on the landing. "Mrs. is awake," said she. "I have told her you are here. Come, and let us see if she will know you." I did not need to be guided to the well-known room, to which I had so often been summoned for chastisement or reprimand in former days. I hastened before Bessie and softly opened the door. A shaded light stood on the table, for it was now getting dark. There was the great four-post bedstead with amber hangings as of old. There was the toilette table, the armchair, and the footstool, in which I had 100 times been sentenced to kneel, to ask pardon for offenses by me uncommitted. I looked into a certain corner near, half expecting to see the slim outline of a once dreaded switch, which used to lurk there, waiting to leap out imp-like, and lace my quivering palm with shrinking neck. I approached the bed. I opened the curtains and leaned over the high-piled pillows. Well did I remember Mrs. Reed's face, and I eagerly sought the familiar image. It is a happy thing that time quells the longings of vengeance and hushes the promptings of rage and aversion. I had left this woman in bitterness and hate, and I came back to her now with no other emotion than a sort of ruth for her great sufferings, and a strong yearning to forget and forgive all injuries, to be reconciled and clasp hands in amity. The well-known face was there, stern, relentless as ever. There was that peculiar eye which nothing could melt, and the somewhat raised, imperious, despotic eyebrow. How often had it lowered on me menace and hate, and how the recollection of childhood's terrors and sorrows revived as I traced its harsh line now. And yet I stooped down and kissed her. She looked at me. "Jane Eyre," she said. "Yes, Aunt Reed. How are you, dear aunt?" I had once vowed that I would never call her aunt again. I thought it no sin to forget and break that vow now. My fingers had fastened on her hand which lay outside the sheet. Had she pressed mine kindly, I should at that moment have experienced true pleasure. But unimpressionable natures are not so soon softened, nor are natural antipathies so readily eradicated. Mrs. Reed took her hand away, and turning her face rather from me, she remarked that the night was warm. Again she regarded me, so icily. I felt at once that her opinion of me, her feeling toward me, was unchanged and unchangeable. I knew by her stony eye, opaque to tenderness, indissoluble to tears, that she was resolved to consider me bad to the last, because to believe me good would give her no generous pleasure, only a sense of mortification. I felt pain, and then I felt ire, and then I felt a determination to subdue her, to be her mistress in spite both of her nature and her will. My tears had risen just as in childhood. I ordered them back to their source. I brought a chair to the bedhead. I sat down and leaned over the pillow. "You sent for me," I said, "and I am here, and it is my intention to stay till I see how you get on." "Oh, of course. You have seen my daughters?" "Yes." "Well, you may tell them I wish you to stay, till I can talk some things over with you I have on my mind. Tonight it is too late, and I have a difficulty in recalling them, but there was something I wished to say. Let me see." The wandering look and changed utterance told what wreck had taken place in her once vigorous frame. Turning restlessly, she drew the bedclothes round her. My elbow, resting on a corner of the quilt, fixed it down. She was at once irritated. "Sit up," said she. "Don't annoy me with holding the clothes fast." "Are you Jane Eyre?" "I am Jane Eyre." "I have had more trouble with that child than anyone would believe. Such a burden to be left on my hands, and so much annoyance as she caused me, daily and hourly, with her incomprehensible disposition, and her sudden starts of temper, and her continual unnatural watchings of one's movements. I declare, she talked to me once like something mad, or like a fiend. No child ever looked or spoke or looked as she did. I was glad to get her away from the house. And what did they do with her at Lowood? The fever broke out there, and many of the pupils died. She, however, did not die, but I said she did. I wish she had died." "A strange wish, Mrs. Reed. Why do you hate her so?" "I had a dislike to her mother always, for she was my husband's only sister and a great favorite with him. He opposed the family's disowning her when she made her low marriage, and when news came of her death, he wept like a simpleton. He would send for the baby, though I entreated him rather to put it out to nurse and pay for its maintenance. I hated it the first time I set my eyes on it, a sickly, whining, pining thing. It would wail in its cradle all night long, not screaming heartily like any other child, but whimpering and moaning. Reed pitied it, and he used to nurse it and notice it as if it had been his own, more indeed than he ever noticed his own at that age. He would try to make my children friendly to the little beggar. The darlings could not bear it, and he was angry with them when they showed their dislike. In his last illness, he had it brought continually to his bedside, and but an hour before he died, he bound me by a vow to keep the creature. I would as soon have been charged with the pauper brat out of the workhouse, but he was weak, naturally weak. John does not at all resemble his father, and I am glad of it. John is like me and like my brothers. He is quite a Gibson. Oh, I wish he would cease tormenting me with letters for money. I have no more money to give him. We are getting poor. I must send away half the servants and shut up part of the house or let it off. I could never submit to do that. Yet, how are we to get on? 2/3 of my income goes in paying the interest of mortgages. John gambles dreadfully and always loses, poor boy. He is beset by sharpers. John is sunk and degraded. His look is frightful. I feel ashamed for him when I see him. She was getting much excited. "I think I had better leave her now," said I to Bessie, who stood on the other side of the bed. "Perhaps you had, miss, but she often talks in this way toward night. In the morning she is calmer." I rose. "Stop!" exclaimed Mrs. Reed. "There is another thing I wish to say. He threatens me. He continually threatens me with his own death or mine. And I dream sometimes that I see him laid out with a great wound in his throat or with a swelled and blackened face. I am come to a strange pass. I have heavy troubles. What is to be done? How is the money to be had?" Bessie now endeavored to persuade her to take a sedative draught. She succeeded with difficulty. Soon after, Mrs. Reed grew more composed and sunk into a dozing state. I then left her. More than 10 days elapsed before I had again any conversation with her. She continued either delirious or lethargic, and the doctor forbade everything which could painfully excite her. Meanwhile, I got on as well as I could with Georgiana and Eliza. They were very cold indeed at first. Eliza would sit half the day sewing, reading, or writing, and scarcely utter a word either to me or her sister. Georgiana would chatter nonsense to her canary bird by the hour and take no notice of me. But I was determined not to seem at a loss for occupation or amusement. I had brought my drawing materials with me, and they served me for both. Provided with a case of pencils and some sheets of paper, I used to take a seat apart from them near the window and busy myself in sketching fancy vignettes representing any scene that happened momentarily to shape itself in the ever-shifting kaleidoscope of imagination. A glimpse of sea between two rocks, the rising moon and a ship crossing its disk, a group of reeds and water flags and a naiad's head crowned with lotus flowers rising out of them, and an elf sitting in a hedge sparrow's nest under a wreath of hawthorn bloom. One morning I fell to sketching a face. What sort of a face it was to be, I did not care or know. I took a soft black pencil, gave it a broad point, and worked away. Soon I had traced on the paper a broad and prominent forehead and a square lower outline of visage. That contour gave me pleasure. My fingers proceeded actively to fill it with features. Strongly marked horizontal eyebrows must be traced under that brow. Then followed, naturally, a well-defined nose with a straight ridge and full nostrils, then a flexible-looking mouth, by no means narrow, then a firm chin with a decided cleft down the middle of it. Of course, some black whiskers were wanted and some jetty hair tufted on the temples and waved above the forehead. Now for the eyes. I had left them to the last because they required the most careful working. I drew them large. I shaded them well. The eyelashes I traced long and somber, the irids lustrous and large. Good, but not quite the thing, I thought, as I surveyed the effect. They want more force and spirit, and I wrought the shades blacker, that the lights might flash more brilliantly. A happy touch or two secured success. There, I had a friend's face under my gaze, and what did it signify that those young ladies turned their backs on me? I looked at it, I smiled at the speaking likeness. I was absorbed and content. "Is that a portrait of someone you know?" asked Eliza, who had approached me unnoticed. I responded that it was merely a fancy head and hurried it beneath the other sheets. Of course, I lied. It was in fact a very faithful representation of Mr. Rochester. But what was that to her, or to anyone but myself? Georgiana also advanced to look. The other drawings pleased her much, but she called that an ugly man. They both seemed surprised at my skill. I offered to sketch their portraits, and each, in turn, sat for a pencil outline. Then Georgiana produced her album. I produced to contribute a watercolor drawing. This put her at once into good humor. She proposed a walk in the grounds. Before we had been out 2 hours, we were deep in a confidential conversation. She had favored me with a description of the brilliant winter she had spent in London 2 seasons ago, of the admiration she had there excited, the attention she had received, and I even got hints of the titled conquest she had made. In the course of the afternoon and evening, these hints were enlarged on. Various soft conversations were reported and sentimental scenes represented, and in short, a volume of a novel of fashionable life was that day improvised by her for my benefit. The communications were renewed from day to day. They always ran on the same theme: herself, her loves and woes. It was strange, she never once adverted either to her mother's illness or her brother's death, or the present gloomy state of the family prospects. Her mind seemed wholly taken up with reminiscences of past gaiety and aspirations after dissipations to come. She passed about 5 minutes each day in her mother's sick room, and no more. Eliza still spoke little. She had evidently no time to talk. I never saw a busier person than she seemed to be, yet it was difficult to say what she did, or rather, to discover any result of her diligence. She had an alarm to call her up early. I know not how she occupied herself before breakfast, but after that meal she divided her time into regular portions, and each hour had its allotted task. 3 times a day she studied a little book, which I found on inspection was a common prayer book. I asked her once what was the great attraction of that volume, and she said, the rubric. 3 hours she gave to stitching with gold thread the border of a square crimson cloth, almost large enough for a carpet. In answer to my inquiries after the use of this article, she informed me it was a covering for the altar of a new church lately erected near Gateshead. 2 hours she devoted to her diary, 2 to working by herself in the kitchen garden, and 1 to the regulation of her accounts. She seemed to want no company, no conversation. I believe she was happy in her way. This routine sufficed to her, and nothing annoyed her so much as the occurrence of any incident which forced her to vary its clockwork regularity. She told me one evening, when more disposed to be communicative than usual, that John's conduct and the threatened ruin of the family had been a source of profound affliction to her. But she had now, she said, settled her mind and formed her resolution. Her own fortune she had taken care to secure, and when her mother died, and it was wholly improbable, she tranquilly remarked, that she should either recover or linger long, she would execute a long-cherished project, seek a retirement where punctual habits would be permanently secured from disturbance, and place safe barriers between herself and a frivolous world. I asked if Georgiana would accompany her. Of course not. Georgiana and she had nothing in common. They never had. She would not be burdened with her society for any consideration. Georgiana should take her own course, and she, Eliza, would take hers. Georgiana, when not unburdening her heart to me, spent most of her time in lying on the sofa, fretting about the dullness of the house, and wishing over and over again that her Aunt Gibson would send her an invitation up to town. It would be so much better, she said, if she could only get out of the way for a month or two till all was over. I did not ask what she meant by all being over, but I suppose she referred to the expected decease of her mother and the gloomy sequel of funeral rites. Eliza generally took no more notice of her sister's indolence and complaints than if no such murmuring, lounging object had been before her. One day, however, as she put away her account book and unfolded her embroidery, she suddenly took her up thus. Georgiana, a more vain and absurd animal than you was certainly never allowed to cumber the earth. You had no right to be born, for you make no use of life. Instead of living for, in, and with yourself as a reasonable being ought, you seek only to fasten your feebleness on some other person's strength. If no one can be found willing to burden her or himself with such a fat, weak, puffy, useless thing, you cry out that you are ill-treated, neglected, miserable. Then, too, existence for you must be a scene of continual change and excitement, or else the world is a dungeon. You must be admired, you must be courted, you must be flattered, you must have music, dancing, and society, or you languish and die away. Have you no sense to devise a system which will make you independent of all efforts and all wills but your own? Take one day. Share it into sections. Each section apportion its task. Leave no stray unemployed quarters of an hour, 10 minutes, 5 minutes. Do each piece of business in its turn with method and with rigid regularity. The day will close almost before you are aware it has begun, and you are indebted to no one for helping you to get rid of one vacant moment. You have had to seek no one's company, conversation, sympathy, forbearance. You have lived, in short, as an independent being ought to do. Take this advice, the first and last I shall offer you, then you will not want me or anyone else, happen what may. Neglect it, go on as heretofore, craving, whining, and idling, and suffer the results of your idiocy, however bad and insufferable they may be. I tell you this plainly, and listen, for though I shall no more repeat what I am now about to say, I shall steadily act on it. After my mother's death, I wash my hands of you. From the day her coffin is carried to the vault in Gateshead Church, you and I will be as separate as if we had never known each other. You need not think that, because we chance to be born on the same parents, I shall suffer you to fasten me down by even the feeblest claim. I tell you this, if the whole human race, ourselves excepted, were swept away, and we too stood alone on the earth, I would leave you in the old world and betake myself to the new. She closed her lips. You might have spared yourself the trouble of delivering that tirade, answered Georgiana. Everyone knows you are the most selfish, heartless creature in existence, and I know your spiteful hatred towards me. I have had a specimen of it before in the trick you played me about Lord Edwin Vere. You could not bear me to be raised above you, to have a title, to be received into circles where you dare not show your face, as you acted the spy and informer and ruined my prospects forever. Georgiana took out her handkerchief and blew her nose for an hour afterwards. Eliza sat cold, impassible, and assiduously industrious. True generous feeling is made small account of by some, but here were two natures rendered, the one intolerably acrid, the other despicably savorless for the want of it. Feeling without judgment is a washy drought indeed, but judgment, untempered by feeling, is too bitter and husky a morsel for human Deglutition. Swallowing. It was a wet and windy afternoon. Georgiana had fallen asleep on the sofa over the perusal of a novel. Eliza was gone to attend a Saint's Day service at the new church, for in matters of religion she was a rigid formalist. No weather ever prevented the punctual discharge of what she considered her devotional duties. Fair or foul, she went to church thrice every Sunday, and as often on weekdays as there were prayers. I bethought myself to go upstairs and see how the dying woman sped, who lay there almost unheeded. The very servants paid her but a remittent attention. The hired nurse, being little looked after, would slip out of the room whenever she could. Bessie was faithful, but she had her own family to mind and could only come occasionally to the hall. I found the sick room unwatched as I had expected. No nurse was there. The patient lay low and seemingly lethargic. Her livid face sunk in the pillows. The fire was dying in the grate. I renewed the fuel, rearranged the bedclothes, gazed a while on her who could not now gaze on me, and then I moved away to the window. The rain beat strongly against the panes. The wind blew tempestuously. One lies there, I thought, who will soon be beyond the war of earthly elements. Whither will that spirit, now struggling to quit its material tenement, flit when at length released? In pondering the great mystery, I thought of Helen Burns, recalled her dying words, her faith, her doctrine of the equality of disembodied souls. I was still listening in thought to her well-remembered tones, still picturing her pale and spiritual aspect, her wasted face and sublime gaze as she lay on her placid deathbed and whispered her longing to be restored to her divine Father's bosom, when a feeble voice murmured from the couch behind, "Who is that?" I knew Mrs. Reed had not spoken for days. Was she reviving? I went up to her. "It is I, Aunt Reed." "Who I?" was her answer. "Who are you?" Looking at you with surprise and a sort of alarm, but still not wildly. "You are quite a stranger to me. Where is Bessie?" "She is at the lodge, Aunt." "Aunt," she repeated. "Who calls me aunt? You are not one of the Gibsons, and yet I know you. That face and the eyes and forehead are quite familiar to me. You are like Jane Eyre." I said nothing. I was afraid of occasioning some shock by declaring my identity. "Yet," said she, "I am afraid it is a mistake. My thoughts deceive me. I wish to see Jane Eyre, and I fancy a likeness where none exists. Besides, in 8 years she must be so changed." I now gently assured her that I was the person she supposed and desired me to be, and seeing that I was understood and that her senses were quite collected, I explained how Bessie had sent her husband to fetch me from Thornfield. "I am very ill, I know," she said ere long. "I was trying to turn myself a few minutes since, and found I cannot move a limb. It is as well I should ease my mind before I die. What we think little of in health burdens us at such an hour as the present is to me. Is the nurse here, or is there no one in the room but you?" I assured her we were alone. "Well, I have twice done you a wrong which I regret now. One was in breaking the promise which I gave my husband to bring you up as my own child. The other—" She stopped. "After all, it is of no great importance, perhaps," she murmured to herself. "And then, I may get better, and to humble myself so to her is painful." She made an effort to alter her position, but failed. Her face changed. She seemed to experience some inward sensation, the precursor perhaps of the last pang. Well, I must get it over. Eternity is before me. I had better tell her. Go to my dressing case. Open it and take out a letter you will see there. I obeyed her direction. "Read the letter," she said. It was short and thus conceived. "Madam, will you have the goodness to send me the address of my niece, Jane Eyre, and to tell me how she is? It is my intention to write shortly and desire her to come to me at Madeira. Providence has blessed my endeavors to secure a competency, and as I am unmarried and childless, I wish to adopt her during my life and bequeath her at my death whatever I may have to leave. I am, Madam, etc., etc., John Eyre, Madeira." It was dated 3 years back. "Why did I never hear of this?" I asked. "Because I disliked you too fixedly and thoroughly ever to lend a hand in lifting you to prosperity. I could not forget your conduct to me, Jane, the fury with which you once turned on me, the tone in which you declared me abhorrent, in which you declared you abhorred me the worst of anybody in the world, the unchildlike look and voice with which you affirmed that the very thought of me made you sick, and asserted that I had treated you with miserable cruelty. I could not forget my own sensations when you thus started up and poured out the venom of your mind. I felt fear, as if an animal that I had struck or pushed had looked up at me with human eyes and cursed me in a man's voice. Bring me some water. Oh, make haste. Dear Mrs. Reed, said I, as I offered her the draught she required, think no more of all this. Let it pass away from your mind. Forgive me for my passionate language. I was a child then. 8, 9 years have passed since that day. She heeded nothing of what I said, but when she had tasted the water and drawn breath, she went on thus. I tell you, I could not forget it, and I took my revenge. For you to be adopted by your uncle and placed in a state of ease and comfort was what I could not endure. I wrote to him. I said I was sorry for his disappointment, but Jane Eyre was dead. She had died of typhus fever at Lowood. Now, act as you please. Write and contradict my assertion. Expose my falsehood as soon as you like. You were born, I think, to be my torment. My last hour is racked by the recollection of a deed which, but for you, I should never have been tempted to commit. If you could but be persuaded to think no more of it, aunt, and to regard me with kindness and forgiveness. You have a very bad disposition, said she, and one to this day I feel it impossible to understand. How for 9 years you could be patient and quiescent under any treatment, and in the 10th break out all fire and violence, I can never comprehend. My disposition is not so bad as you think. I am passionate, but not vindictive. Many a time as a little child I should have been glad to love you if you would have let me, and I long earnestly to be reconciled to you now. Kiss me, aunt. I approached my cheek to her lips. She would not touch it. She said I oppressed her by leaning over the bed, and again demanded water. As I laid her down, for I raised her and supported her on my arm while she drank, I covered her ice-cold and clammy hand with mine. The feeble fingers shrunk from my touch. The glazing eyes shunned my gaze. Love me then, or hate me as you will, I said at last. You have my full and free forgiveness. Ask now for God's, and be at peace. Poor suffering woman. It was too late for her to make now the effort to change her habitual frame of mind. Living, she had ever hated me. Dying, she must hate me still. The nurse now entered, and Bessie followed. I yet lingered half an hour longer, hoping to see some sign of amity, but she gave none. She was fast relapsing in a stupor, nor did her mind again rally. At 12 o'clock that night, she died. I was not present to close her eyes, nor were either of her daughters. They came to tell us the next morning that all was over. She was by that time laid out. Eliza and I went to look at her. Georgiana, who had burst out into large weeping, said she dared not go. There was stretched Sarah Reed's once robust and active frame. Rigid and still, her eye of flint was covered with its cold lid. Her brow and strong traits wore yet the impress of her inexorable soul. A strange and solemn object was that corpse to me. I gazed on it with gloom and pain. Nothing soft, nothing sweet, nothing pitying or hopeful or subduing did it inspire. Only a grating anguish for her woes, not my loss, and a somber, tearless dismay at the fearfulness of death in such a form. Eliza surveyed her parent calmly. After a silence of some minutes, she observed, with her constitution, she should have lived to a good old age. Her life was shortened by trouble. And then a spasm constricted her mouth for an instant. As it passed away, she turned and left the room, and so did I. Neither of us had dropped a tear. And that concludes chapter 1 of Jane Eyre. Had a few thoughts in there that I wanted to bring up, but maybe we'll talk about it next time. That was kind of a long chapter, and the next one was pretty short, so I will see you next weekend. I hope you have a great rest of the weekend. Thank you very much. And I hope you have a lovely, lovely day. Bye, guys. everybody, welcome back. I'm Christina Wainwright, the branch manager at the Pacific Beach Library here in San Diego, and it's good to see you here at Tea with Jane Eyre.
That was a fun one. Begin by simply listening. Slow down. See just how peaceful today can be. Thank you so much for swinging by. I've been your host, your obedient servant, Sebastian. Sing smalls, you're doing smalls. Vincent twice. You can always call me Bennett. Chain there and see Florida. Catch you guys on the flip side.